Let's return to some more positive news. At the start of the show, of course, I spoke with our reporter Annalise Nielsen, who's in London for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, marking 70 years of service, the longest reign of a British monarch. The Queen has visited Australia 15 times since sailing into Sydney Harbour in February 1954 as a 27-year-old. Her last visit was in 2011. Let's bring in Dr. Cindy McCreery, a British monarchy historian at the University of Sydney. Thanks for joining us, Cindy. Just to help us understand how significant, we all know how significant the Queen is in our lives. She's been the monarch the whole of our lives, most of us. But how significant is she in the history of Britain and the British monarchy?
So, Chris, I think that Queen Elizabeth is not only the longest reigning monarch, but she's also the oldest person to still be a monarch on the throne today. And I think you have to go back to the reign of Louis XIV, a French king in the 17th century, to find a king who reigned longer than Queen Elizabeth. So she's a record breaker. She's reigned longer than Queen Victoria, than George III, than Elizabeth I, all very famous and well thought of British monarchs. And in addition to being the longest reigning monarch, I think that history will look back and judge Elizabeth II as perhaps the most successful and effective monarch in British history. She's managed to retain a sense of stability and grace and dignity over 70 very turbulent years, not just in the UK, but throughout the world. And I think people, not just in Commonwealth realms like Australia or the UK, but around the world, see her as the model monarch, whatever their own political beliefs are.
Yeah, absolutely. She's a woman that I think all of us admire, no matter what we think about the monarchy in relation to this country. She's overseen a period of enormous change across the globe in geopolitics, through the Cold War, of course, the shrinking of the British Commonwealth, the UK going into the European Commission and out of it, wars across the globe, all sorts of turmoil, the pandemic most recently. Yet she's managed not to only maintain her dignity, but to also show a certain amount of stoicism throughout that period too, to lead by example. Is that a fair comment?
Absolutely. And also in terms of her family life, she's had to weather trauma, the loss of her husband last year, but in past years, the divorces of 3 of her children, a major fire at her main residence, Windsor Castle. And she clearly was affected by that, as also the death of her daughter-in-law, Diana. And I think that people have warmed to Elizabeth in recent years, not just because she's a monarch, but because she's a human being. She suffered COVID. And I think that iconic photograph of her sitting alone in St. George's Chapel at the funeral of her husband, Prince Philip, touched many people's hearts because, of course, for many of us, that was our experience of funerals during COVID. And I think people admire her all the more for being human and also insisting that the laws do apply to her.
Just very, very briefly, if she wants to, after this week, if she feels that it's too much to continue in this job, is it easy for her just to hand over to Prince Charles, or does she essentially need to stay there as long as she draws breath?
She could choose to abdicate, but I don't think she will. I think for her, that would be a very radical and tumultuous decision. I think what we'll see is more of the same. She will gradually delegate more and more in-person activities to Charles and even William, but she will remain monarch of the United Kingdom, I believe.
Thanks so much for joining us, Cindy. Really appreciate that.
Great pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Dr. Cindy McCreery there giving us some historical context for Queen Elizabeth II. What a remarkable woman, and we're all focusing on that, of course, at this special time of the Platinum Jubilee.